Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 podcast. I'm Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. And guys, we're going to admit this to you up front. It's hard to talk about this team right now. It's hard on a Wednesday to talk about this team for one simple reason. And that reason is everyone's hurt.
Yeah, everyone's hurt. We just got the practice report for today, first practice of the week on Wednesday. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 starters were limited or out. 6 starters out, and the one that was limited is Anthony Richardson, who is out of team drills, nursing his hip oblique issue. So it's tough. It's tough to know what to say about the matchup till we know for sure. Like if Jonathan Taylor is going to be able to play, that seems unlikely till we see him out there. Ryan Kelly, Kenny Moore, Kwity Paye, we didn't see basically all week and now into this week, so you'd have to say the same for them. But again, things can change. They could come back on Thursday or Friday, and then it's a different deal. I don't want to really guess on all of these guys. That's not probably the most productive thing. I would just say that I think the encouraging thing, if you're looking for that, is that Anthony Richardson at least was out there in some capacity. He had helmet on, shoulder pads on, was doing the individual type stuff when we were out there. And the way he's worded it since we talked to him on Sunday after the game is that, it's mostly soreness to him, and he feels like they're being cautious. And he certainly seemed energized on the sidelines, like he certainly wanted to get in. Some of that's kind of how he's wired, but he's a big guy that you can follow on body language, I think, with some of this stuff. And I would think that he certainly is in the mindset of playing this week. I know he's excited to get the opportunity of getting back to play where he's from in Jacksonville. I know he's got friends and family who want to come to the game. So this one's been circled for him. And ever since last game ended, he thinks it's more soreness he's got to get through. So that one, I think you can still be hopeful that there's at least a decent to solid chance he plays. With all the other guys, I mean, it's just a total guess when we haven't seen, like I said, Ryan Kelly, Kenny Moore, Kwity Paye in more than a week. And then Jonathan Taylor has another ankle sprain, and I don't know. That one's been hard to read how serious that is. We know when we've heard high ankle sprain in the past, this year and last year, or the last few years has usually been a big problem for players, but I don't know how serious his is yet. But it seems like if it's an ankle sprain at all, it would be a risk to play him on Sunday. But yeah, the whole situation has us guessing. It makes kind of the whole team and matchup hard to read right now.
Yeah. Well, like for instance, the Jaguars, if you just look at their defensive splits, they're terrible against the pass. Like awful. Tyson Campbell is on IR, has been since the beginning of the season. When I looked up, Ronald Darby is the veteran who's starting for them right now. When I looked up his coverage stats on Sports Info Solutions, he was giving up almost an average of 13 yards per attempt on passes thrown in his direction. That's pretty bad. The other corner is going on his 8th or 9th start in the NFL as a former 7th-round pick. They're 30th in just about everything in passing. They don't sack the quarterback. Josh Hines-Allen, I believe, has a concussion and might not play. They're one of 2 teams in the NFL that does not have an interception yet. So, matchup-wise, you're looking at those numbers and you're like, well, I know what the answer is here. They got to throw. Especially if they don't have Jonathan Taylor. But that's complicated a little bit if Anthony Richardson, depending on how much he practiced or how much he didn't practice. So this is inside. I've got to set the table for this a little bit, but this is a little bit of inside IndyStar baseball here. I was in the middle. I was trying to update our story today on Anthony Richardson, and so I walked out to practice, saw him practicing, and walked back in to update our story. Because Anthony Richardson briefly said that he wasn't practicing today. So I needed to rewrite parts of the story to make it look like to reflect how it had changed. So I didn't get to stay out there and watch him throw. What did you see? What did you see from him throwing? I assume all eyes were just your eyes were just glued to Richardson while you were out there. But what did you see while I was inside furiously typing away on the same story for the 5th time?
In uniform, pads, helmet, all of that looked like normal stuff you do at the very beginning in terms of taking handoffs and just kind of carrying out some of the very light rollout bootleg type throws when you're throwing it like to an equipment manager. But he didn't really do any of the other drills that we normally would see him do. They didn't do like the gauntlet drill where they run through the ball security drill. He didn't do that. And then while we were out there, they didn't do the routes on air that they will normally throw, with all quarterbacks just kind of heaving it deep to the wide receivers. So it was really hard to tell that he was doing much other than kind of being, a big stress for him, and with everything when he is able to be out there is mechanics and getting just basic fundamental footwork and reps and making everything feel more natural. So it felt like that's what he was doing, is like they weren't going to risk anything that has him touched in any way or overextended physically in any way, but they wanted him to get a little bit a step beyond mental reps of just watching the sideline, which he did all of late last season with the shoulder injury. So they just kind of had him going through some motions, I think. But again, it's kind of how I figured this would go on a Wednesday practice when they've got 2 more. Tomorrow, I think, is a more telling day. I know he said today that he feels like he could play if he doesn't practice. That would just be kind of surprising to me. If they find it's risky enough to not practice him all week and put him out there in a live game setting. So I think we're going to get a better tell the next 2 days if he can progress to something more like full reps. But yeah, today was light and precautionary, and I think an opportunity for Joe Flacco for the first time to get first team reps in the event that he has to end up starting, which is a different situation. He stepped in nicely, finished the game out nicely on Sunday, but the Steelers game plan to face Anthony Richardson and the rushing threat. So if it ends up being Joe Flacco having to start this week and the Jaguars have that somewhat in their minds, it is going to be helpful for Joe Flacco to get some first team reps if he has to step in and do that.
Yeah. I have playoff baseball on in the background. I got to explain this laugh if anybody heard it. An Astros fan just flipped off the camera.
Oh,
like they tried to cut it really fast, but they did not. It was very obvious.
They pulled a Najee Harris.
Yeah, showed the sea of fans, and this dude stands up right in the middle of the screen and drops a big bird. It's harder. It's a little harder than with Najee Harris. It's harder to figure out what he's so upset about. Maybe the fact that his team has scored 1 run in the first 15 innings of the playoffs and are trailing again.
That'll
but
do it.
Yeah, a little bit of a you're sitting. I assume someone's sitting in the box right there and is like, oh no, what do we do? Get it off.
That's going to be our podcast for a couple weeks, is us fitting this in around playoff baseball. But here we go.
Yeah. I want to talk about Taylor for a second, and if Taylor can't go. Currently, 4 games into the season, Jonathan Taylor has 349 yards rushing. He ranks 5th in the NFL. He's been really good. I think he's averaging 4.8 yards per carry. He's still not the most consistent receiver, but if he gets the ball, if he catches the ball cleanly, he can be pretty devastating there too. They have not gotten a ton, and by a ton I mean almost anything, from their backup running backs. Trey Sermon so far, 9 carries, 24 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards. Tyler Goodson does not have a carry yet. He has 1 catch for 2 yards. They kept these guys around pretty much, it seems like, in large part because of what they did against Pittsburgh in a situation where they didn't have Taylor last year or Zach Moss. But that's a pretty big worry for me if Jonathan Taylor cannot go in this game. And maybe we fight like this does not seem like it's nearly as serious as the one that led to all the surgeries a couple of years ago. When I saw him in the locker room on Sunday, he wasn't really limping. We'll get a chance to talk to him on Thursday. We're recording this on Wednesday. But the fact that you've given one running back 72 carries so far and your backup has only got 9, like there's reason to be concerned about who's carrying the ball, right? If Taylor can't go.
Yeah, well, those 9 carries for Sermon are the only 9 carries any other running back has had this season. So they have pretty much ridden Taylor. Taylor's the only one they trust with the run game outside of they brought Trey Sermon in near the goal line against the Bears to kind of finish a drive off. But yeah, it's 9 carries for 24 yards. That's only 2.7 yards a carry for Sermon. Now, it's a little unfair because he lost 4 on a speed option, and we know that speed options are just death that should not count in stats. So I'm going to peel the league off to get that to not count against Trey's stats. That should count for something else.
Would you so to make the book work? Would you have a line that says S. Steichen 1 -4?
Yeah, something like that. Like in the book, it's S. Steichen -4. You can even put an asterisk, and just below it just says speed option penalty. So that's how I would do it. But yeah, it's it's a tricky. It's also like it's hard for me to discuss the run game without Anthony because when Anthony Richardson was in there last season, even though it was a small sample, if you do the splits, like Zach Moss was so much more effective with Anthony Richardson than without. And on Sunday, or coming out of Sunday's game, like Drew Ogletree mentioned that how when Anthony's out there, he didn't have to even Jay Watt as a defensive end who had to choose in the read option game whether to go after the running back so that Anthony could keep the ball or go after or freeze on Anthony to hand off to Jonathan Taylor. It was like a free block on the toughest defensive end a team has. So you don't have to block him, but then better than that, you get these linebackers or you get these tight ends who are blockers, Drew Ogletree and Malali Cox, building up acceleration up to the linebackers, which is a smaller player, and they've got the speed advantage on leverage. And so it changes a lot when that changes and you have to block the defensive end now. We saw it was harder to run without even with Jonathan Taylor out there, harder to run with Joe Flacco at quarterback in the shotgun or in the pistol where you don't have that same effect. You can't freeze the defensive end that way. So whether Trey Sermon, if it's Trey Sermon and Anthony Richardson, that's a different situation than Trey Sermon and Joe Flacco. If we get the latter and it's Trey Sermon and Joe Flacco, I have to think we're going to have a pretty another game that's like throw a lot and hope you have the lead to then build your run game kind of late down the stretch as more of your kind of finish the game look to it. It's just going to be harder to do it that way. They're going to have to sort of lighten the box by throwing the ball. And if they're effective with some of the plays they had on Sunday to Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. in some of these deep zones or outside the numbers, some of these catch and run opportunities that all of a sudden work as like these, like it can extend drives. Eventually I think they will back off, and that's probably when they'll have an easier opportunity to go to Trey Sermon. But yeah, it's hard to figure out because then if Anthony plays, it's trying to figure out how is he limited? Is he fully fresh? If he's, if it's in their head that they don't want him to run, how much of an effect is there? And also, what was happening last year was, and we saw it in preseason too, when Anthony plays with a running back other than Jonathan Taylor, defenses often dictate that the ball goes to that running back. They'd rather deal with that. I don't know if that changes if Anthony Richardson is banged up and maybe they want to test whether the Colts are willing to have him run, or if it has the same effect and maybe that would at least help that running back out by giving him an extra block against the defensive end, get those tight ends up to the linebackers. But it's just hard to kind of picture what their game plan is going to be until we know running back and quarterback. In these games against Jacksonville, the Jaguars have been effective because they've limited how much the Colts can use Jonathan Taylor. Where he's been effective, his yards per carry have been very solid, but it's very few carries, because either they're scoring enough with their offense to kind of put them into 2-minute situations, or they just limit the explosive damage of Jonathan Taylor, and eventually they punish the Colts for their passing game issues that have struck up in the past. But it's hard to visualize a matchup without knowing quarterback and running back that are going to be out there. I just think that I think they're going to throw on these guys because also, and probably still if Anthony's out there, because the thing about the Jaguars defense is that they are second in the league in the percentage of snaps they spend in man coverage, according to some data from Fantasy Points. The only team that does more man coverage than the Jaguars is the Browns, and they do that because they have some of these elite man cover cornerbacks. The Jaguars are doing it without elite or anything near elite.
I'm shocked by that statistic. I'm shocked. Like, just based on who their defensive backs are.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that they're playing that much man.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge reason why they're where they're at, because not only are those guys not getting the job done in coverage, but again, like their last game out against the Bills, it put them in a terrible bind against Josh Allen, because man coverage is what you want to face when you have the mobile quarterback, and you can use routes to dictate where those defenders are going to be. They turn their back to the quarterback. They vacate the middle of the field, and Josh Allen was just killing them, throwing and running. They couldn't cover his receivers in man, and then if they did, he was taking off and killing them on the ground. It'll be interesting to see if they get that same look and Anthony Richardson is playing, how much does he scramble? If he's going to scramble, he needs to slide. Like, that was something you saw Josh Allen doing some, and then sometimes Josh Allen just doesn't. He's the one guy that tends to get away with taking those hits and never seems to get hurt. But it needs to be something I think Anthony, especially if he's still feeling the effects of that injury, needs to take into consideration. But that's like the situation the Colts, the defense they're getting, or that the Jaguars have shown so far, is exactly what the Colts would like to face, which is 39% man coverage. That teams that do that are almost always going to do it on third downs. And where the Colts ended up eating the Steelers up is they were a cover 3 team on base downs, but they were man coverage team on third downs. And that's where Josh Downs is so effective, and that's where some of that quarterback run early in the game was effective. That's what they would love to see out of the Jaguars. But again, does Anthony play? And if he plays, how willing are they to have him scramble? And does he slide? Does he make it through? It's sort of that whole conversation is going to rear back up, because it's a game that's built for Anthony's legs to really be effective. His running, we have to see whether he's fresh and how much they want to trust that he's able and willing to do that.
Yeah. So to your point, this is why I think it's so surprising to me that they're running so much man. We've already mentioned Ronald Darby and Monteric Brown, but just to Ronald Darby, I know is a big name. This is his 6th team in the NFL. He's 30 years old. It's a 6th team in the NFL. He's bounced around a lot because he's not sticking anywhere. Monteric Brown, this will be his 4th start in the NFL. He's a former 7th-round pick. Andre Cisco is good, or at least he's a playable starter who sometimes can intercept the ball. And then their other safety is Antonio Johnson, who was a 5th-round pick last year. And after their nickel, I believe, is Jerrion Jones, who's a young 3rd-round pick. This is a super young secondary. It doesn't have top-line players. Now, I will say this: the Colts secondary, you could say a lot of the same things about, but like at least the Colts secondary is supposed to have Kenny Moore, which I guess you could say Tyson Campbell, but Tyson Campbell's not as established as Kenny Moore. Like, this is a more inexperienced secondary, more inexperienced, less decorated secondary than the Colts. And we've been saying that the Colts secondary is far too young and far too inexperienced all season. Like, to play man with that, to play a ton of man with those guys at corner, that almost seems like malpractice.
Yeah, it's not good. And I don't know, maybe they realized something in the last game because that man percentage actually went down after they faced the Bills, but the Bills just absolutely rolled them in the first half. So maybe that was their lesson, to play less of it in general, but also less of it against mobile quarterbacks. But it's weird. It's Ryan Nielsen, the new defensive coordinator for the Jaguars, came from the Falcons, where he was one of these rising stars. There was a lot of hype about them moving to that, making that switch to defensive coordinator. It just has really not gone well. Probably a mix of things. It's exposing these players in man coverage too much, and also, we knew that they had some defensive problems coming into the year, and those are worse with some injuries now. I know you mentioned this. Josh Hines-Allen is in the concussion protocol, and those don't tend to clear just for the next games. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see if he's out there. If he's not, though, that's where, like, having Anthony available to, now you only have to freeze one of their defensive ends in the zone read game, and that could be Trayvon Walker, and it just puts these matchups should just be in a Colts' favor if they have Anthony out there. Now, if the Colts are down to their backup running back and quarterback, I think some of these things could even out. I mean, there's certainly a world where Joe Flacco plays pretty well. Like, he did it last year, stepping in for the Browns as a starter, and was solid backup play on Sunday. But we just see a lot of the explosive. Like, on Sunday, we saw the explosiveness go way down. Certainly the run game explosiveness seemed to disappear, and so the pass game explosiveness, if the Jaguars want to live in more man coverage, that's a possibility. But I don't know. It's a matchup. It's a strange matchup in that way. The Jaguars are just struggling like crazy on defense, and the Colts, I think you could talk yourself into last week being a turning point game for their offense, but they could be down their starting center, quarterback, and running back too. So, it depends on how available some of their best players are. But this is a game where I think that, like, given what they're dealing with, Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr., those are my co-heroes of the game off Sunday. I think they're going to be the most important players in this game if there's no Jonathan Taylor. So those guys have to supplement or replace that run game element. Those guys have to kill these. They have to win these matches. If they go to zone, do what they did on Sunday, settle into those zones and find yak opportunities, catch and run. I think, as I've looked through it, this streak against the Jaguars goes back for a decade. I've only been here since 2021, the losing streak in Jacksonville. But the commonality in those three games is the Colts have kind of had rock bottom passing game performances in all three. You think back to it, 2021, that was right at the edge of the Carson Wentz meltdown. That kind of finished itself in Jacksonville, and then they traded him in the offseason. 2022 is when they went into Jacksonville without Michael Pittman Jr. or Alec Pierce. So you had Matt Ryan throwing to Mike Strawn, Desmond Patman, Paris Campbell, and they got shut out. And last year was right kind of during Gardner Minshew's worst stretch, where he was trying to do things. He really didn't have a physical the Jaguars and the Browns, before they kind of went in a hole, and then they kind of found a way to play around him later in the season. But each time they've gone to Jacksonville recently, their passing game has been the worst version of itself, and it just sort of detonates. This week, you look at the matchup. This is what's hard, because like the what's on paper never seems to matter going into these games. But you would like to think that this could be a different year for that, because the Jaguars are so compromised in their scheme and their available pass rushers and defensive backs. And the Colts just got Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs fresh and productive and beating zone coverage. So it's going to come down a lot to can Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson hit these guys when they're open, because they're probably going to be open based on how the Jaguars have covered so far. And that, I think, is going to tell a lot of the game, because if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play, and especially if Anthony Richardson doesn't play, I don't think this is a game you can just count on the run game to carry you.
Yeah. Josh Hines-Allen possibly being out is huge to me, just because, like, we've seen what Shane Steichen can do when you have one dominant pass rusher with TJ Watt last week, where it was, 2 tackles, no sacks, doubled the heck out of them. But then there's the other piece of this that we haven't got a chance to talk about, which is just like you just alluded to it. The Colts offense in Jacksonville, for whatever reason, like you go through the matchups, but they don't end up mattering at the end of the day. I feel like every time they go to Jacksonville, I do the matchups and look at it, and it feels like, oh, this game should go this way, this game should go that way. Like, I know you weren't here in 18. That game was the most ridiculous one ever. It was in the middle of the Colts winning 10 of 11 games. It was the one loss. Their offense was clicking as a running game and a passing game. They scored 0 points in Jacksonville. Like, there's a piece of it that's just like Shane Steichen doesn't want to talk about it. The Colts don't want to talk about it. But this place has been an absolute house of horrors for them, and it goes beyond explanation. Like, it's so bad that if you told me there was a curse, I'd be 10% willing to believe that there's an actual magical curse going on.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like that obviously it's gone on 9 years is the most amazing part, but to me, it's the last 3 years. It's not even been close. That's why it really feels like a house of horrors. Is it's hard to win the NFL, and just coming up short in any game, even. Like the opener streak, they have a lot of these games. They've lost that forever too, but a lot of super close games in there in different teams. And that kind of feels like that one feels a little bit more random. This feels like something very specific to the place, and the matchup is giving them such a problem. So like the 3 that I've been here for since 2021, the Colts have been outscored 93-31 in those 3 games. So an average loss of 20 per game. They're just getting – nothing is working at all for them down there. And so you look for the commonality. Well, nothing's working. So there's a lot of common themes in those games. But the 2 biggest ones I came away with was that their passing game seems to detonate. And there does seem to be, the last 3 years at least, something around that was a clue that it could detonate. Like I said, Carson Wentz falling apart in 2021. Not having those receivers available in 2022 with the injuries. And then last year, maybe we didn't have the warning heading in, but that was sort of a big Gardner Minshew regression game. And it happens, it coincides by the fact that they also are struggling on defense. So it's like they have to lean on that passing game while it's at its worst. And that's the other flip side is that, the commonality I've found on that side of the ball is Trevor Lawrence just never has to do anything difficult against the Colts. His numbers are not crazy productive against them. He's his past 5 starts. So his first game ever was against the Colts, and it was on the road, and it was horrific in Indy. But his past 5 games against them, 4 of them were in Jacksonville. 1 of them was in Indy to start last season. He does not have a 300-yard performance in any of those. He's only at 7.2 yards per attempt, but he completes 77% of his passes, 9 touchdowns, and only 2 picks. And so he's able to kind of just do this higher volume, higher completion. They aren't able to rattle him. They just aren't. When they do get pass rush around him, he's been able to escape, extend the play. And a lot of other times he throws quick enough to neutralize that pass rush. And the Colts secondary just hasn't been able to answer that. And so the Colts defensive line is compromised again this year, where they're down 3 of their top 7 guys on IR. And then if Kwity Paye were to miss, that'd be 4 of your top 7 defensive linemen who are and those are most of your pass rush oriented players are not going to be out. So I think a lot of this is going to fall in the secondary to play better than what they've seen in the past few years. Last year it was a young secondary, so they had some issues, especially with Calvin Ridley. That was just a really bad matchup for them, and he's not there anymore. But most of these matchups they've not really had. They haven't made it difficult enough on the receivers that Trevor's throwing against. So we'll see if they can do that this week. I get the sense that it's I'll be kind of surprised if we see Kenny Moore play this game. Well, maybe he will, but if he doesn't, it's Chris Lamons is going to be out there. Like they're feeling it in that area too, because obviously Juju Brents is out. Samuel Womack has played fairly well, but I think there's bigger tests coming to him. And then we'll see. Jalen Jones 2 weeks ago had an amazing game. This past week kind of regressed back to where he had been before. But we'll see if they can affect them enough in the secondary, because again, like I said, on offense, you can't rely on that run game to carry the day. I don't think you can rely on the pass rush to carry the day with how many injuries they have there right now too. So something's going to happen with the secondary where they've got to take advantage of the struggles the Jaguars are going through, where there just seems to be a real disconnect between Trevor Lawrence and he's had Evan Ingram out. That has hurt a lot the past couple games, but there's a disconnect between the coaching and the players on that side of the ball. Seems quite obvious if you follow some of the storylines out there. So the Colts need to pounce on that and not have this be the get-right game that it often feels like it is whenever the Jaguars' offense is going through a funk and they get the Colts. That's often kind of when they work through their issues.
Yeah, he's throwing deep a lot. He's throwing down the field a lot. Like you look at Trevor Lawrence's completion percentage and it's 53.3, and you think like, what's going on with Trevor Lawrence that he could be in that range? Well, his average depth of target is over 10 yards, which is really, really far. Like over the course of a full season, that would be it's there's a lot of seasons in the last couple of years, according to Next Gen Stats, where guys where the longest average depth of target for the entire league is like 9.9 or 8 something. And he's at like 10.6-ish, I think, off the top of my head. And the funny thing is, Benjamin Solak at ESPN did a good job on this. The funny thing is, he's not been bad on the downfield throws. He's like 7 of 16 for 222 yards on deep balls or something like that. But the fact that they're always throwing them has made everything else worse. And it set it up where, like, a lot of times when the Colts have played the Jaguars in the past and struggled, it was this is kind of a Matt Eberflus defense and kind of a Gus Bradley defense thing where they can get a lot of short passes underneath. But the Jaguars are not playing like that right now. They probably should, especially if Kenny Moore's out. You should probably unleash Christian Kirk a little bit in the slot in the short to intermediate range. But the way they've been playing these first 4 weeks of the season, Brian Thomas Jr. is the matchup to be afraid of. He's averaging 16.2 yards per catch. He's a rookie. He gets down the field. Jalen Jones has struggled on those types of balls for the most part this season. But like I'm just used to seeing a much more efficient Jaguars passing game than what's been there so far. And people have talked about a lot of the reasons for that. A lot of it is just they're just throwing the ball. They're not giving him the short, easy throws that most modern offenses give their quarterbacks now. Like with Anthony Richardson, it's a little bit different because this is our first time really watching him play, and I think that he looks downfield. Like he's more, but we've seen Trevor Lawrence not be this player before. They're asking him to go down the field a lot, and it's not really working so far.
Yeah, I think part of that's a shift to adding Brian Thomas Jr., as you mentioned, and Gabe Davis. He's a little bit more of a downfield type of player than they've had in the past. Some of it is, when you're down the amounts that they're down, they're trying to make it up faster. And then a big issue they've had is the past 3 games, I think, they've been without Evan Ingram. And This was crazy. The only players last season who caught more passes than Evan Ingram in the NFL, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's it. He had more catches than Michael Pittman Jr., one spot ahead at 114. Yet he only averaged 8.4 yards a catch. So he was that very short range, reliable, chain moving type player. It seems like they haven't replaced that at all. They wanted to open up a more reliable underneath game with Christian Kirk, moving him to the slot. That was the idea of drafting Brian Thomas Jr., but it hasn't made up for it. So Evan Ingram, I saw, is back to practice today. He's working back from a hamstring injury he suffered it in warmups before they faced the Browns. So this Sunday would be 3 weeks since he suffered that. So 2.5 weeks so he got back on the practice field. So you'd think if that's one of those minor, more on the minor side hamstring injuries, that he's got a chance to play. You'll just have to see how the practice week goes because hamstrings are so tricky. But that's going to be a big part of them having any kind of like balance to their offense, any kind of, we talk about the Colts trying to stay on the field. That's what the Jaguars are trying to find a way to do, is stay on the field to be able to get to explosive plays that Brian Thomas Jr. has shown the capability of getting open and creating some of. But like with the Colts, the Colts have gone through times, they're trying not to just force the explosive play when it's not in the flow of an offense. It's not, they're not finding any surprising moments to try this. They're just almost kind of forcing it. So that's where Evan Ingram's going to be key for them to try and make that happen. But I mean, the ways to attack the Colts right now are not so much with your tight ends and middle of the field where Julian Blackmon has been great and Nick Cross is playing better than a lot of us maybe, better than we maybe knew he was going to at the start of the season. But it's sort of like any of those true cornerback spots. If Kenny Moore doesn't play, you've got Chris Lamons in there, and then Jalen Jones and Samuel Womack. Those are the matchups that the Jaguars have to look at and think like, all right, let's get back to how Trevor Lawrence often plays against the Colts. Let's win those matchups, get guys open, both for that intermediate quick game, but then occasionally that deep shot to Brian Thomas or Gabe Davis. If you can extend the play against a compromised Colts pass rush. So I think the Colts are still, even as much as the Jaguars are struggling right now, I think if they get Evan Ingram back, the Colts are going to be at a disadvantage in that matchup. And that's where they've got to make sure they're sound against the run game to at least kind of make it to where the Jaguars can't do both, or the Jaguars have to pick one or the other. I think mostly this is going to have to be a game, though, that because of where the Colts defense is on the whole, just so many injuries adding up in two different levels, the front level and or this back level of the defense. I think it's a game that their offense has to win more than their defense.
Yeah. The other thing that I think, you sounded this alarm last week with Pittsburgh, and I thought it played out this way, except for Najee Harris being terrible at football. I don't know any other way to say that. He's not good. He may have been good at one point, but he's not good now.
Made an easy villain.
Yes, very easy villain. I'm still not 1,000% convinced that the run defense is fixed, especially with all these defensive ends out. And the Jaguars have not run it much. They've been pretty darn successful when they do run it. Travis Etienne, 4.6 yards per carry. Tank Bigsby, his backup, 8.2. Now, part of that is a 58-yard carry. But even if you take off his 58-yard carry, he should be in like the 5.5-ish range. I should be able to do this faster. 5.7. Trevor Lawrence is at 7.6. We all know the Colts have had trouble getting quarterbacks on the ground. Like this run game, they haven't used it much because they've been behind so much. But like that sounds like the kind of run game that could exploit the Colts a little bit, especially with how many injuries they have up front. I think the one big equalizer in the passing game could be Laiatu Latu versus Cam Robinson. Cam Robinson's already given up 3 sacks this season. He's not the best left tackle in the world. Latu only has 1 sack so far, but according to Sports Info Solutions, he's got 13 pressures, which is second on the team behind Dio Dengbo. At some point, Latu's going to start getting the quarterback on these wins. And he's got a favorable matchup this week. This is the time they've got injuries at other defensive end spots. This feels like the time that Latu's got to, he's got to finish some of these to put Lawrence under duress.
Yeah, and you talk about the run game. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is a bit of a sneaky factor in that. This season, he's only carried the ball 8 times, but he has 61 yards.
Yeah.
4 first downs on 8 carries. And over the course of his career, it's at 4.8. Now, he's not high volume, but he's kind of like he's that short yardage when they'll do that zone read. They'll kind of reserve it just for short yardage or goal line. But, I mean, he's run for 11 touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. So that is going to test the defensive ends. It's going to test – and sort of Latu. Like, you want to have him to have his wins in the pass rush because that's what he's built to handle right now. With all the injuries they have, if Kwity Paye doesn't make it back, your ends are looking to be Latu and
Dio
Dengbo and Isaiah Land. And then Dio Dengbo, they've been trying to play him inside with the absence of DeForest Buckner when you get into passing situations. Dio played like 76% of the snaps last week. So he is getting quite a run, and he played really well. So it's like a lot falls on Dio and a lot falls on Latu. But, yeah, they have to win these. They have to find a way to – it's tricky. They have to find a way to do both. They have to find a way to hold the edge and get after the passer. And right now these guys, 2 of those 3 I mentioned, Land and Latu, are built much more to rush the passer. Dio is the one who is very good at setting the edge. It's just sort of like when do they have him at edge versus when do they use him inside. So it's going to be tricky. It's going to be you hope they have enough bodies to be able to handle this. This is where, I'm curious what the weather is going to be like this week, because a few times, sometimes in Jacksonville, it's –
I think rain.
Is it?
Let me look it up. But the TV guys were talking about this earlier. The TV guys are always on top of this because their cameramen have to stand outside in the rain while we get to sit in the press box. But I think they were saying something about rain on Sunday.
Maybe the effects of that hurricane holding over.
The temperature, 90 degrees.
Yeah,
Sunday
was 90 degrees. So I think there has been a thing where an element, one of the many factors into why the Jaguars have toasted the Colts over the years in Jacksonville is that when they have this mix of running the ball pretty well with winning high completion percentage and they go to tempo, they kind of have these defensive linemen running every which way where they're not getting into a flow. They're not getting those sacks. They're having to react, get back on screens, get back into making tackles down the field, and they wear them down. And it's like it tests your depth there. And that's where one of the ideas, heading into this year was Chris Ballard want to have this super deep defensive line. They put everything into that. Now, based on injuries, they just are whittled down. And so, like you said, you're left with guys like Dio Dengbo playing like 75% of the snaps. So it'll be interesting. You add that into the humid elements. They're just going to have to find some ways they're just going to have to force even a couple 3-and-outs or get a turnover, something that's going to get them off the field, keep the plays down, because that's been an ongoing conversation that the Colts finally kind of corrected last week because they were able to get that 17-0 lead and flip the script a little bit. But they can't have this be another game where their defense is on the field a ton because the lack of bodies. Trevor hasn't worked this year, but when he gets Evan Ingram back, Trevor working in tempo is usually to his strengths. And then doing that in that humidity, that's where you could see a tough day coming for the Colts defense if they're on the field a lot and there's this balance element to the Jaguars offense that has them kind of guessing all the time.
I think we disappoint the listeners if I didn't complain a little bit about having to go to Jacksonville. Number one, so the weather report is humid and cloudy with an afternoon thunderstorm. Don't like that. You know what comes with afternoon thunderstorms? Afternoon delays.
And there's nothing that Joel loves more in this world than being at that stadium longer than is required.
Yeah, don't want that. What time do you get into Jacksonville on Saturday?
I think like 5 o'clock.
Not me. I am getting there at 10:16 p.m. and hopefully flying back out less than 24 hours after that. I don't want the listeners to think that I've suddenly become okay with this. We can't normalize this. We can't make it okay. You know, we've got to make it. We've got to let people know this is still my least favorite trip. And the weather is going to welcome me by being rainy on Saturday, potentially rainy on Sunday, and hopefully I'm out by Monday. Also, I have to do a team
out Sunday night, right?
Yeah. So you can fly in rain, can't you? Most of the time.
Last time I tried to actually fly from Jacksonville, it got delayed 3 times, and I had to spend the night in Atlanta. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. But that's where we're going to have that Rush post-game podcast on the way to the airport. So we may be in a punchy place. We'll see how the Colts deliver on another game in Jacksonville.
It'll either be on the way to the airport, or we'll be doing this at our connection from different chairs in the airport. Because let's be honest, no one should spend more time in Jacksonville than they have to. And our boss is not a cruel person. It doesn't make me.
Maybe this will be the game that you flip to the football things that have you terribly vexed.
Jacksonville things that left me terribly vexed.
Well, we may need more than 3 if we're going to expand it to the whole city.
What did I say earlier today? I said this in the media room, and I think the podcast listeners will enjoy it. Oh, you guys were trying to figure out who on the roster has won in Jacksonville, because there's players from other teams, like Joe Flacco has won in Jacksonville. There's some other guys who have won in. Taven Bryan was on a Jaguars team, so he's actually won in Jacksonville, although not much, for being honest. And I believe my line was, yeah, but if you win in Jacksonville, did you really win, or did everyone lose?
Very fair. Fun fact, when we were looking into that, because it was very hard to find very many players on this team that have won in Jacksonville, because most of these players haven't been on other teams. But one player that I found that did win a football game in the Jaguars stadium is A.B.
Florida
Mitchell.
Georgia game? Is this a Florida Georgia game?
Yeah. A.B. Mitchell. So I don't know. That doesn't count as beating the Jaguars there, but it was interesting to me.
Well, and I mean, and let's be honest, for a while now, beating Florida hasn't mattered that much. But also that does give him something against the curse, because there have been some really bad Jacksonville teams that have won in this rivalry. And I think that's why every Colts fan who's been around the block a couple times with this game is going, I don't care that Jacksonville is the NFL's only winless team. I don't care. It's Jacksonville. It's been since 2014 since the Colts have won there. And honestly, if I'm thinking about it, like, the fact that they're defeated and haven't won a game so far would make me feel even worse, because it'd be like, well, they're going to get a win somewhere. The law of averages says they're going to get a win somewhere. I need someone to get to the bottom of the curse. That's what I need. I want some fan out there needs to get to the bottom of this curse. I will accept all submissions. I want to know what started this. What's the reason for this nonsense? Who do we blame? Who deserves not too much blame or too little blame, but the correct amount of blame
All
for
the
what's
blame.
going on in Jacksonville? Because
Well,
I really think it's beyond football at this point. This is supernatural.
Well, if you get the answer, you can take it beyond villain of the game, villain of the decade, basically. Who's
They
at fault for
need-
this decade?
The other thing is, if they identify what the reason is, like whatever spirits or magic or other realm is causing these losses, they can do what Ted Lasso did in the first season and banish appease those spirits before they go to the game. Like Shane Steichen should be on this. What is causing the curse? How do we get rid of it? What do we need to offer to the people who are upset to lift this Colts, the city of Jacksonville or Florida or whatever has placed on the Indianapolis Colts?
I don't know. Maybe the solution is the kid who grew up just outside of Jacksonville, and Anthony Richardson. Remember, he's never played in a series, so
I mean, he could be immune to whatever the curse is because he was born there. We're not born there. He's born in Miami. He grew up there though.
grew up near there and trains there every offseason. That's where he spends his off seasons, basically. So, or a lot of the time.
So maybe he's immune. They need him to get healthy because he's immune.
You know, when you were talking about what it looks like on paper, the Colts have one of the easiest 3-game stretches coming up you could possibly script. In at least if you were picking 3 teams to face in the next 3 weeks, the Jaguars, the Dolphins, and the Titans.
Yeah, I didn't watch that Dolphins Titans game, but it sounded like you did. Did you have regret?
I'm vexed. Very vexed from what I watched in that game. I had that on multi-view because the Lions and Seahawks are much more entertaining and better teams. But it was like a train wreck you couldn't look away from. Every time you look over, it was mostly the Dolphins offense doing something just ridiculous and non-productive. And then we've seen the Titans got their first win in that game, but them trying to execute late game on offense has been a nightmare. So it's a weird situation where like the Colts are as beat up as they could be. But if you're going to take a stretch of the season where you want to deal with that before getting your big guns back, you would pick this 3-game stretch, except when one of those games against the Jaguars is in Jacksonville, it actually turns it from an easier game into the hardest game on the schedule based on recent history.
Well, they need to get Anthony Richardson healthy because maybe that's what they've needed all along.
Maybe that's the
somebody who's immune because he grew up near the curse.
You know, Anthony Richardson's first ever college start came in that stadium against Georgia.
How did he do? I forget. How did he do?
We're going to leave that part out. It was Florida against Georgia, so that should answer your question.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. And that was probably like a national title winning Georgia team or like close to it.
It was talk about being thrown to the wolves. Your first start for a struggling team is against Georgia in the neutral site, and national title winning Georgia, monster defense Georgia. So now that was the hardest game he's ever had to play. So, but hey, it was like his toughest moment on a field came in that stadium. Maybe this is sort of like, I don't know, maybe this is where he can kind of like vindicate that and break the curse all at once.
I mean, I think if the Colts win, I think it's pretty obvious that what they needed all along was somebody from that part of Florida.
Yeah, that part, again, being born there, because it wasn't enough to get a former Jaguars quarterback last year.
Nope.
Gardner was
that didn't work.
Solution. So
that didn't work. That did. You're right. That didn't work. So it might have to go deeper than that. Maybe it's not the Jaguars that are the root of the curse. Maybe it's the soil itself. The swampy, musty soil.
And see, when we get out there and it's 90 degrees and there's thunderstorms forming in the sky and you're all terrified, you're going to look down and Anthony's going to have a smile on his face because he was born in this. Like
he did say during the practice that was super rainy the other day. That was super rainy during training camp that it felt like Florida weather to him. And I didn't want to correct him. I didn't want to make him feel like he wasn't at home. but it was not super warm that day. So it was just the rain that felt like home. It wasn't the temperature.
Maybe we'll get both. There's a storyline.
Maybe the rain, like, so like, you know how Superman gets his strength from the sun? Maybe if it rains on Anthony, he will like increase in strength.
Oh, I like that. If that happens, then the roof has to always be open on rainy days at Lucas Oil. And just give him the superpower. And it'll be
maybe the Florida humidity is the same thing. And that's what like maybe it'll all of a sudden his cells will get like much more high functioning and
yeah.
You never know.
You never know.
We've gotten very silly at the end of this Colts Cover-2 podcast. Like I said, I didn't want to disappoint you. I want you guys to know that I'm not happy about this trip. I just can't disappoint the listeners. Can I trade from the division? Can I trade?
Yeah, I would love that. Like
we'll trade. So like we'll trade the Jacksonville Jaguars to the NFC South. We'll go NFC South, and I'm gonna trade them for. I don't want Tampa. New Orleans feels like we would have to throw something else in. Atlanta's
Falcons? Probably the fair trade. It's only 3 hours away.
No. You know what? You know what the problem is, though? The Falcons and Saints really hate each other, so you can't take that rivalry. I know how this sounds. People aren't going to like this, but maybe they are going to like this because of how bad this team's going to be for a couple of years. I offer the NFC South, the Jacksonville Jaguars, in exchange for the Carolina Panthers, straight in.
Hey, we watched this team go to Carolina last year, and they won. So
straight up,
reverse it all. They just would always win that game instead of lose it.
Yeah, so that's it. It's a standing offer. It's out there. Commissioner Goodell can talk to me. Whoever the commissioner of the NFC South is can talk to me. Let's do it. Jacksonville for Carolina, straight up. Nothing else thrown in.
I think the only complication I see with this is I think you're going to get vetoed by 3 teams: the Saints, Falcons, and Buccaneers. You do not want to lose the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, that's probably fair. If you're watching on video, my youngest son hey, there he is. He just made a sound appearance. He's making an appearance.
There we go.
So that probably means it's time to end the podcast. You'd probably rather listen to Watley. You want to say something? Not loud enough? Okay, for the Colts Cover-2 podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. Pray for me, y'all. I have to go to Jacksonville this weekend.